There has never been a fortune in history this large and this quietly lost. When the wars ended, the vaults were full, but the ledgers were not. Some numbers were missing. Some lines were never written. Was this a collapse or a deliberate erasure? Some accounts were never closed, some inheritances were never divided, and some brothers never sat at the same table again. From the outside, they looked like one family, but inside, they were no longer reading the same book. What if the fortune was never lost? What if it was broken apart, to disappear? What if history itself was only allowed to see certain pages? Welcome to Financial Chronicle, where we uncover the mathematics behind power. The official records tell one story, but the real story begins where the numbers stop. By the early 19th century, the Rothschild family had mastered visibility. Governments saw loans, markets saw stability, rivals saw an empire. But inside the family, not every transaction was meant to be seen. Alongside public balance sheets existed private ledgers, handwritten, coded, and often personal. These books recorded favors, emergency transfers, political debts, and quiet arrangements that never reached official archives. After wars ended and borders shifted, some of these ledgers vanished. Not stolen, not destroyed by accident, simply removed. What remained were gaps, sudden drops in figures, inheritances that no longer aligned with known assets. This is where historians hesitate, because missing pages don't prove theft, they prove intention, and intention is far more dangerous than loss. Behind the public balance sheets, another system existed, one that was never designed for auditors, governments, or history books. Within the Rothschild family, certain ledgers were kept separate, small, handwritten volumes, protected by trust rather than law. They tracked sensitive transfers, political guarantees, emergency funds, and promises that could not survive daylight. These records did not move through offices, they moved through people. A brother, a courier, a single trusted clerk. No copies were made, no summaries were filed. When a ledger was complete, it did not go to an archive. It disappeared into safes, private estates, or personal custody. And when relationships shifted, when loyalties weakened, those books became liabilities. Not evidence of crime, but evidence of power exercised beyond rules. The most dangerous accounts are the ones that were never meant to be remembered. Not all wealth leaves a footprint. Beyond banks and official books, there were accounts that did not exist on paper, only in memory, trust, and timing. These were not numbered, they were understood. Funds moved without names, through intermediaries, across borders before borders were fully drawn. In moments of crisis, these invisible accounts mattered more than gold in a vault. They financed survival, influence, and leverage when formal systems collapsed. To outsiders, balances seemed to shrink. To governments, money appeared to vanish. But inside the network, nothing was lost. It was relocated. Invisible accounts allowed wealth to escape taxation, confiscation, and political revenge. They were flexible, silent, and almost impossible to trace. Historians search for them in archives and ledgers. They find nothing, because these accounts were never written down. They lived only as long as trust endured, and when trust broke, they vanished without a trace. When the wars finally ended, Europe expected clarity. Peace treaties were signed, borders were redrawn, debts were calculated, but the numbers did not add up. During conflict, money moves fast and without questions. After conflict, every transaction demands explanation. This is where silence becomes suspicious. Vast sums had flowed through wartime channels, loans, guarantees, emergency transfers made under urgency and fear. Yet when peace arrived, many of these flows left no clear destination. Governments asked where the money went. Archives searched for receipts. Auditors demanded closure. What they found were gaps, figures that abruptly stopped, accounts that no longer existed, assets that could not be matched to outcomes. War had provided cover, peace removed it. And in that moment, the real mystery emerged. Not how money was made during chaos, but how it quietly avoided explanation afterward. Because peace exposes what war successfully hides. At first, the changes seemed small, a line slightly lower than expected, a total that no longer matched the previous year, but patterns began to emerge. Across reports, certain figures declined without explanation, not through loss, not through visible transfers. They simply disappeared. For outsiders, this looked like miscalculation or error. For insiders, it signaled something else entirely. Numbers vanish only when they are moved beyond the system that counts them. Assets were reclassified, redirected, or shifted into forms that official balance sheets could not capture. Gold became influence, capital became access, ownership became obligation. Nothing was destroyed, nothing was wasted. The wealth did not shrink. It changed shape, and once numbers lose their form, they lose their accountability. This is the moment historians argue about collapse, but those who understand power recognize it as transformation. As scrutiny increased, a fundamental tension emerged. Private wealth does not obey the same rules as public power. Governments demand transparency. Markets demand confidence. But private capital demands control. For families operating above national boundaries, visibility was a liability. The more governments knew, the more they could demand, tax, or seize. So a separation formed. Public money remained visible, stable, and reassuring. Private wealth moved quietly, insulated from politics and borders. This divide allowed influence without exposure. Loans shaped nations, but ownership remained hidden. To the public, power looked institutional. To those inside, it was personal. This dual structure confused investigators and frustrated regulators. They searched for leverage where none legally existed, because the true power was no longer held in institutions. It was held in discretion. And discretion, unlike authority, leaves no documents behind. Power shared is rarely power questioned, but power divided invites silence. As wealth fragmented, so did trust. What had once been coordinated became cautious. Conversations shortened. Letters grew vague. Brothers who once acted as a single mind began to protect their own positions. Not openly, quietly. Information was delayed. Decisions were made locally. Consensus faded. No arguments were recorded. No disputes reached the public. But alignment was gone. Silence replaced strategy. Each branch guarded its knowledge, believing secrecy was safety. Yet secrecy breeds suspicion. Without transparency, cooperation weakens. Without cooperation, unity becomes performance. From the outside, the family still appeared synchronized. Inside, timing slipped. Signals misfired. This silence did not announce collapse. It announced something more subtle, the end of shared certainty. And in systems built on trust, certainty is everything. Trust does not collapse all at once. It fractures quietly. Small doubts appear first. A delayed response, a decision made without consultation, a transfer explained too late. Each moment seems insignificant. Together, they change everything. What was once instinctive coordination becomes calculation. Every move is measured. Every message is filtered. In a system built on shared confidence, hesitation is corrosive. It slows decisions. It weakens response. It invites isolation. As trust fractured, so did responsibility. No one wanted to be exposed. No one wanted to carry risk alone. So risk was distributed, not evenly, but defensively. This did not destroy the network. It reshaped it. Power remained, but it no longer flowed freely. It pooled. It hardened. And once trust breaks, it is never truly repaired, only managed. Inheritance assumes continuity. Assets are passed, control remains, and value is preserved. But in this case, inheritance arrived without substance. Documents listed shares, titles transferred authority, yet the underlying wealth no longer aligned with the records. Heirs received responsibility without visibility, control without clarity, promises without proof. What should have been a transfer became a puzzle. Some assets had been dispersed years earlier. Others had been transformed into influence, favors, or long-term obligations impossible to quantify. The numbers on paper survived. The substance behind them did not. This created tension between generations. Expectations collided with reality. Questions emerged that had no clean answers. Inheritance without assets does not weaken power immediately. It weakens understanding. And when successors cannot see what they control, authority becomes symbolic. Because wealth can move silently. But confusion always leaves a trace. Some vaults were sealed not for security, but for uncertainty. Across Europe, private safes and family-controlled vaults accumulated wealth that was never audited, never inventoried, and never fully accessed. Their contents were known only to those who sealed them. Time passed. Custodians changed. Keys were lost, duplicated, or intentionally withheld. In some cases, vaults remained untouched for decades, not because they were empty, but because opening them raised questions no one wanted to answer. What belonged to whom? Which agreements still applied? Which obligations had expired? An unopened vault preserves secrecy, but it also preserves doubt. As generations passed, these sealed reserves became liabilities rather than assets, not lost, but unusable. Because wealth locked away without consensus is no longer power. It is hesitation, sealed behind steel and silence. Control creates efficiency, but absolute control creates distance. As systems tightened, decisions concentrated in fewer hands. Oversight increased, access narrowed. What was designed to protect wealth began to isolate it. Layers of approval slowed action. Information traveled upward, but rarely back down. Those closest to operations lost visibility, while those at the top lost context. This imbalance carried a cost. Absolute control reduces flexibility. It assumes foresight. It leaves little room for adaptation. In moments of uncertainty, decentralized systems respond faster. Centralized ones hesitate. By guarding every lever, control weakened initiative. By preventing exposure, it prevented correction. The system remained powerful, but brittle. Strong under pressure, fragile under change. This was not failure. It was a trade-off. And every system that chooses total control eventually pays for it in speed, trust, or resilience. Not all agreements are written. Some are understood. In private finance, especially at the highest levels, trust often replaces contracts. A word given between principals can carry more weight than ink on paper. These arrangements were flexible, discreet, and efficient. They allowed rapid decisions when formal approval would have caused delay or exposure, but they carried risk. Without signatures, there were no fixed terms. Without documents, there was no shared record. Memory became the archive. As time passed, interpretations shifted. What one party remembered as a commitment, another recalled as a favor. What was once mutual understanding became ambiguity. When circumstances changed, these informal agreements became points of tension. No court could enforce them. No ledger could clarify them. They survived only as long as trust did. And once trust weakened, the agreements dissolved quietly, leaving no trace except consequences. Historians rely on documents, ledgers, letters, official records. But this story resists documentation. The most important decisions left no paper trail. The most consequential movements avoided archives entirely. What cannot be proven is often ignored. This creates a convenient boundary between history and speculation. Scholars stay where evidence is visible. They avoid what lies beyond confirmation, not out of fear, but out of discipline. To write history without sources risks credibility. To acknowledge missing sources raises uncomfortable questions, so gaps are labeled as coincidence, silences are treated as absence, and unresolved patterns remain unexplored. This is not a failure of historians, it is a limitation of method. Because history records what survives, power operates where records do not. And the deeper power goes, the less it leaves behind for historians to find. Unity is often assumed when power appears stable. From the outside, the family looked seamless, shared names, shared symbols, shared legacy. But unity was an image, not a constant reality. Each branch operated within its own pressures, politics, and priorities. Geography shaped strategy. Local alliances shaped decisions. What connected them was not daily coordination, but long-term alignment, an agreement on outcomes, not methods. Over time, even that alignment weakened. Different risks produced different instincts. What one branch saw as caution, another saw as paralysis. What one protected, another exposed. The idea of a single will directing everything became a convenient simplification. It reassured governments. It intimidated rivals. But inside, unity required continuous effort, and effort declined as complexity increased. The family did not fragment suddenly. It drifted, and drift, unlike conflict, leaves no clear moment to record. Visibility brings influence, but it also attracts pressure. As financial power grew, so did scrutiny. Governments watched closely. Public opinion hardened. Political climates shifted. At a certain scale, power becomes safer when it is less visible. Influence does not need to vanish to be effective. It only needs to move out of sight. Assets were structured to appear smaller. Control was exercised indirectly. Decision-making retreated behind layers of distance. This was not retreat. It was adaptation. Disappearing power avoids confrontation. It survives regime change. It endures public anger. The most resilient influence is rarely obvious. It shapes outcomes without claiming credit. In this sense, disappearance was not loss. It was strategy. Because power that remains visible too long eventually invites resistance. Power that disappears often lasts longer than anyone expects. Money does not need to remain money to retain power. As scrutiny intensified, wealth shifted forms. Capital became access. Ownership became influence. Liquidity became obligation. Instead of holding assets directly, value was embedded in relationships, guarantees, and long-term positions that resisted measurement. These forms were harder to tax, harder to seize, and harder to explain. On paper, wealth appeared reduced. In practice, leverage remained. This transformation confused observers. They searched for gold and found agreements. They searched for ownership and found dependence. Traditional accounting could not capture these changes. Balance sheets reflect assets, not control. By changing its shape, money escaped systems designed to contain it. It moved where rules were weakest and understanding was limited. This was not concealment through secrecy alone. It was concealment through complexity. And complexity, once established, protects power more effectively than walls or vaults ever could. Fragmentation is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, it can be a form of defense. As pressure mounted, concentration became risk. A single center of power invited attack. Multiple centers created ambiguity. Assets, authority, and responsibility were divided. Not equally, strategically. Each branch held part of the whole, enough to operate, not enough to dominate. This structure reduced exposure. No single failure could threaten everything. No single authority could be compelled. From the outside, fragmentation looked like decline. Internally, it increased resilience. Control no longer depended on unity. It depended on coordination without visibility. This decision came at a cost. Efficiency declined. Speed suffered, but survival improved. Fragmentation did not dissolve power. It redistributed it. And power that is distributed carefully is far harder to confront or contain. The most critical knowledge rarely appears in records. Some decisions were never documented. Some understandings were never formalized. They existed only in conversations, gestures, and shared assumptions. This was intentional. Writing creates permanence. Permanence creates vulnerability. By keeping key decisions unwritten, flexibility was preserved. No document could be leaked. No record could be subpoenaed. No archive could betray intent. But this strategy had consequences. When individuals passed away, knowledge vanished with them. What one generation understood intuitively, the next inherited only partially. Silence protected power in the moment. Over time, it eroded continuity. Historians search for missing documents. They assume destruction. In reality, many documents never existed at all, because the safest record is the one that was never written down. From a distance, the pattern looks like decline. Wealth appears to shrink. Control seems to loosen. Unity fades. This is where interpretations divide. One view sees mismanagement. Another sees fragmentation. A third sees loss, but there is another possibility. What appears as loss may be transformation. What looks like retreat may be repositioning. What seems unplanned may be deliberate. Strategy rarely announces itself. It reveals outcomes, not intentions. If power was truly lost, its effects would be visible: weakened influence, reduced access, diminished relevance. Yet influence persisted. Access remained. Relevance endured. This suggests that something survived beneath the surface. Loss leaves chaos. Strategy leaves structure. The question is not whether wealth disappeared. It is whether disappearance was the design. Because in complex systems, survival often depends on being misunderstood. At the end of the trail, certainty disappears. The records thin out. The witnesses fade. The numbers stop telling clear stories. What remains is not proof, but pattern. Across decades, wealth did not collapse. It changed. It moved. It adapted to pressure, scrutiny, and time. Some fortunes were never recovered. Some accounts were never explained. Some decisions were never revealed. But power does not require explanation to function. It requires continuity. This is why the enigma endures, not because the truth is hidden in a single vault or ledger, but because it is distributed across choices, silences, and omissions. History asks for answers. Power offers ambiguity. And ambiguity, when sustained long enough, becomes its own form of protection. The mystery is not what was lost. The mystery is what was preserved without ever being seen.